Let's go.
Very well timed.
Good morning from Orlando, and welcome to the inauguration of our 2023 Tech Connect webinar series in partnership with NTSA, the National Training and Simulation Association. I'm Carolyn Logue, your host for this webinar. I am the director and co-founder of the Central Florida Tech Grove, and we're so glad that you're here with us today to learn about game jams and how they're being increasingly adopted as a rapid prototyping tool in DoD. Very quickly, I want to share just a few things with you about the Central Florida Tech Grove for those of you that are not familiar with it. We are a fairly young Department of Defense funded innovation center. We opened our doors in January of 2021, which, by the way, 2021 was the year of our first Armed Forces Jam, as you can see from the t-shirt that I'm wearing. And that Armed Forces Jam was actually the inspiration behind this paper that was presented at ITSIC 2022. But Central Florida Tech Grove, our focus is human performance, modeling, training, and simulation for the Department of Defense. As you can see from the slide there, we are unique in that we are funded by 5 of the 6 DoD services: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, and Space Force, as well as 2 other entities within the U.S. Army Futures Command and Army's DevCom, their Army Research Lab here in Orlando. So we are working with all of those entities collaboratively, jointly, helping address needs and problems that they all have and that they share across the spectrum of readiness and human performance for our military. This is the core of what we focus on. Some of you know what those acronyms are, others may not. That's okay. Hopefully, along the bottom of that slide and those underlying areas of capability and technology for this environment of human performance, you see something that relates to you and what you do. And we want you to be part of our Tech Grove community, to engage in our programming, our opportunities, our events, and collaborate and accelerate innovation with us for our customers. We have lots of opportunities for you to engage. This is a list of some of the events that we do on a regular cadence. We have all sorts of other things that go on periodically. If you are not part of our Tech Grove community, please go to that website, put in just a few data points about yourself for us so we can make sure that you get on our list to get notified about all of these opportunities for you to engage with us. And be sure you follow us on social media, LinkedIn. We're also on Facebook. We're also on Twitter. And our website will increasingly be more active with information about events. Now on to the reason that you're here. You were attracted by the title of this webinar, Game Jams. This series does highlight, in each of the 7 or 8 webinars that we do with NTSA and the Tech Connect series, we shine a spotlight on the team, the story, and the innovation embodied in the best papers and tutorial from the previous ITSIC. This particular paper we chose to start with because of how core it is, and it's the relationship of this team that you'll hear from today with the Central Florida Tech Grove and their engagement with us to stand up the Armed Forces Jam, which we will be doing our 3rd Armed Forces Jam later this year. So with that, I am going to turn this webinar over to Austin, Adrian, and Chad so they can tell you about game jams. One more point, sorry, guys. Many of you submitted questions when you registered. Thank you so much. There were some great questions. We have gone through those questions. Many of them will be answered in the presentation that you're about to see. Some of them we will pull out and answer interspersed throughout the webinar. There are a few that we probably won't get to. They're a little bit broader and beyond the scope of this webinar. Lastly, there is the opportunity for you to submit questions during the webinar in the Q&A. Please do that. Don't use the chat function, use the Q&A so that we can respond to your questions. All right, guys, what the heck is a game jam?
Sweet, Carolyn, thank you. Appreciate it. I want to do introductions. First and foremost, I want to make mention that one of our paper submission individuals couldn't make it this morning, Mike Bianchini for Dignitas Technologies. So I'll be taking over some of his reading parts today. But also a part of the panel here is Austin Pinzon. He's the CEO of A Square Games Simulation, and then Adrian Lennon, who is the CEO of A Square Games Simulation. My name is Chad Hoover. I represent Phoenix Digital Studios. Both of us are based out of Orlando, out of the Orlando game space. And today we're going to be talking about game jams and its new form of rapid prototyping. So as a core, game jams have been around for a while, but classically, we're going to be structuring this conversation today a lot of how a game jam is presented in a series of time, right? So we're going to be talking about what a game jam is. We're going to be talking about success stories. We're going to be talking about key trade-offs that happen during a game jam, how you can fluctuate those things. We're going to be talking about ways to apply the process that a game jam can do. And then at the end, we'll be answering questions and facilitating through the Q&A chat functionality. So a game jam itself is broken up into 5 chunks. You have a pitch stage, you have a prototype stage, alpha, polish, and an upload and a present stage. Normally that falls into a 48-hour. Now when we handle like military, something like that, you guys do requests for proposals, which can last anywhere between 6 to 10 months. You can see how that similar process goes from release request all the way down to a contract award and through each of those phases. And you can see that the game development process still follows that same 5-tiered process in that timeline from pre-production all the way up to gold mass. So you can see this process is very similar. So when you're developing things. So what is a game jam? Right? Great question. So by definition, a game jam is a short time-boxed event in which small teams and programmers in a variety of disciplines be able to contribute to utilizing sense of tools to make games or experiences. I look at it as the 4 T's, just like those 4 D's in dodgeball, right? There are 4 T's in a game jam, right? You can manipulate the tools, you can manipulate the themes, the team, and the time, right? Usually certain things are very core to your project, other things that make your project specifically different, right? So when we talk about different types of game jams, right? Game jam has been around for about 20 years, right? You know, recently we've been doing the Armed Forces Jam locally within Orlando, but we are the tail end of what game jam have been going on. In 2002 was the original launch of the game jam. It came to a point where a bunch of friends got together to construct a bunch of crazy ideas, and you can see this one was kind of like Doom inspired. You had to go around and find a particular person inside the sea of pixelated people. Is very interesting of a concept. And so, like as she had mentioned, at ITSEC, A Square team got to show off Metagrove, which is what they built this year. And there was a series of other experiences that were also shown off as well. Right. So now to talk a little bit about like success stories is going to be Adrian and Austin.
Yeah. So we're going to throw off a quick proof of concept of where game jams have been successful in the industry and other places, and to show it's actually worth the time. So we're going to move on into successful game jams. So many independent games and game studios have arisen from successful game jams. A lot of more popular game jams out there are at the international level you'll find are the Global Game Jam, the 7-day FPS Game Jam, as well as studios often adopt the practice of using game jams to rapidly prototype or test new concepts in-house, private jams. A few of the best, success stories out there. Surgeon Simulator was originally created during the first Global Game Jam, sold over 2 million copies. The hit game Super Hot was created during the 7-day FPS Game Jam. It reached its Kickstarter goal of 100,000 within the first 23 hours of its release. And again, not all game jams have to be these public events. The studio that created Goat Simulator held an internal games jam, and it ended up doing so well, it out-earned all of its previous games and became a pivot for that studio. Moving on. Game jams are not only limited to gaming. Some jams don't focus on a theme, but require specific technology to be used, like augmented reality or using Houdini, visual effects. But regardless of the jam's target, the core concept is always the same: to quickly develop a prototype that proves a concept. Orlando is home to several industry-focused game jams, such as the Indie Galactic Game Jam, the Mega Health Game Jam, and the Armed Forces Game Jam. Moving on. Diving into those individual game jams a little more. During the first ever Mega Health Game Jam, there were over 17 entries across 6 different challenge categories. These different challenge categories are pretty much like preset questions or goals that we try to achieve, something to answer or prototype for. In this particular jam, the products created range from mobile to AR to VR devices. The first place winner created an AR bandage app to encourage kids to become more engaged with personal care. It also received a lot of coverage before and after the event. It was featured even on the news. Moving on. Moving into the Armed Forces Jam, Captain Dancavelli says it best. The Navy and other military branches need simulations they use to train service members to be higher quality, more accessible, and more frequent to keep up with competitors. Tapping game developers in the private sector is key to doing just that. And to talk a little bit more about the Armed Forces Jam specifically, I'm going to move this over to Austin.
Thank you, Adrian. Yes, my name is Austin. I'm one of the co-founders and COO of A Square. And yeah, Captain Dan said it right. Technology is moving fast, and the amount of demand in the industry is growing, and it's higher than ever. In 2021, we actually created the Armed Forces Jam, a 48-hour game jam event, as a means for connecting our developer community with the military industry. This was brought to fruition as a concept in a matter of weeks. Normally, we spend months planning events like this, but there was such a need to fulfill, this, that everybody from every part of the industry came together to kind of make this happen. So from proposal to completion, this event was put together in a matter of weeks, but it was only possible by the support from the military industry. This not only put solutions in the hands of people with problems, but the winners of these events, as Chad mentioned earlier, were able to bring their products to ITSEC. So each year that we hold the Armed Forces Game Jam, winners from that event can then take it to ITSEC and present their product there at a global platform. We recently, well, less recently, completed our 2022 Armed Forces Jam back in September's. And some of those applications were on display at ITSEC. And with 2023, we'll be doing the same thing. As part of that, 2 success stories I want to talk about from the first ever Armed Forces Jam include SACTI and Hat Trick. So SACTI was a game created by a team of developers from A Square that featured a randomly generated shoot house. And this concept was originally to use a shooting range, but because of the subject matter experts that we had available at the Armed Forces Jam, the team decided to actually pivot what they were going to create and focus more on training principles and rather than encouraging any training scars. So they instead built a use of force trainer that was better suited to meet the industry's immediate needs. So showing SACTI at ITSEC also gave A Square the opportunity to connect with new customers. And this event even had other bounties from other sponsors that were created to target other challenges. So one of these challenges for the other team, the winner of the Momentum Challenge, Hat Trick, was to create an application that focused on human recognition. So their product featured a PC player and a drone player that was in VR that would kind of move around the environment. And as a non-violent form of a game, they decided to dictate who was missing hats in this environment by using the drone with a PC controller, and the VR player would run around and adorn people with hats. And then they would use this as a form of communication. So there's collaboration, there's communication, there's using tools and systems within the application to kind of prove this human recognition product. So you may be thinking, how does this apply to military simulation? We're talking a lot about games, we're talking about creating fun, whimsical things, sometimes. So how does this actually apply to the industry? Well, as we all know, military contracting can be a pretty lengthy process with a lot of red tape. Independent studios and developers are able to move a bit at a faster pace. They're able to rapidly prototype and visualize concepts that can reduce a lot of costs later. You spend a lot of money and effort on creating these massive projects without actually knowing whether or not the concept is, fruitful. So smaller teams that can rapid prototype these concepts earlier can save you a lot of money. Military game jams aren't entirely a new concept either. Hackathons have always been a thing, or at least have been a thing for a while. And in 2015, the Talos Time Hack Rapid Prototyping event was held in Tampa. Their focus was to pair developers with subject matter experts to work with existing Talos integrated helmet prototypes, very similar to us pairing subject matter experts with the Armed Forces Jam. In 2021, Softworks and US SOCOM created a rapid integration of AI event to crowdsource integration for solutions with modular system components using their AI technologies. Now, again, crowdsourcing ideas, bringing the problem statements to the community, and having them create the concept.
Austin, it might be beneficial here to really more clearly differentiate a hackathon from a game jam, since a hackathon's more, broader in terms of.
Yeah, of course. I mean, they're a bit synonymous between the two. Chad, do you have any?
Yeah, I remember this
you've
question from
heard
when we
this a
did the
million
paper.
times.
So, in my experience, hackathons tend to be much more technical limitations, right? Accomplishing some sort of specific element that needs to be versus the actual product that's being developed itself. Because you'll see hackathons on like this particular piece of software, use this to accomplish this goal. We don't know how it works, but we want it to make sure it be utilized. What can you do? Make this thing fit into this box. And that is how I would define a hackathon, right? Versus a game jam or a game jam process.
Yeah, I'd say a bit of the concepts kind of carry over between the two, but I would argue that game jams are a bit more broader. You're not necessarily trying to, get A to B, as opposed to we want B, and however you develop A and however you develop along that path to B is entirely kind of up to you.
Yeah, interpretation is very wide.
Yeah. All right, and to discuss a bit more about game jams and whether they properly fit your needs for what you're kind of looking for in a solution, Chad, if you would like to discuss game jam trade-offs.
Yeah. So, so the big question here is, who would use a screwdriver to hammer in a nail? Probably very few of us, because that would be a rather difficult ask. And to being able to do that, what it comes down to is game jams are only effective in the right circumstances. Okay. So if you're starting from scratch, it's a great concept to kind of dive into because your opportunity can present itself, right? That doesn't apply to existing assets. In other words, if you have 3D models or pre-existing code that you can piece together to make something new, that works, right? If you have no idea how long something might take, a game jam would be a great starting off point. We find that estimating a task is always easier after starting to work on it. If you spend focused 2 days working on a solution, by the end of those 2 days, you won't have a finished product, but you'll at least have a really good idea what it takes for you to get there. In the simulation industry, estimating a task is very important, as we all know. It happens all the time. And our experience, whenever we estimate something before it actually gets investigated, our estimates are usually way off. Right. So the top chart here shows the traditional process, several of you are probably familiar with, for the source selection process, which involves customer writing, publisher request for proposals, the developer bidding on them, writing the submitting the proposal, and the process can take about a year. You can see the 308 days there, right? In a game jam process, it could replace parts of this process by developer producing playable prototypes instead of writing papers. The source selections, initial interview briefing, and the final proposal request would happen naturally in this process if given the opportunity. When you're putting together this paper, the example was a lot of us have potentially seen MasterChef. Gordon Ramsay goes around and gives the contestants suggestions in the show. Well, during a game jam, organizers like myself, Adrian, Austin, we would go around and do the same thing. And since the customers ideally would be present their entire jam, they would interact with the developers in real time and help them adjust their prototype to match the customers' expectations. Austin had mentioned that briefly about the SAC-T environment that they built the first year. You can see how that pivoted even during the jam itself. right? Typically at the end of the jam, each team presents and showcases their game. Sometimes there's time for judges and evaluates and gives out awards. Those are things that we have done locally, but that's not a case for any game jam, right? The core element of a game jam idea is you want to have fun and you want to enjoy what you're doing in the space itself. The source selection's final briefing and the contract award could happen during a game jam after the showcase, or it could happen at a later date, depending on the customer's time to review, depending on what is being built. 48 hours seems like a very short amount of time, but a game jam only works because limitation breeds innovation. So there's something out there called the paper tearing game. Some of you may have heard of it, but everyone in a room is told they're not allowed to ask any questions, but they can take a piece of paper, they close their eyes, and listening to a series of instructions to being able to get to the same expected goal, right? At the end of this exercise, each person has a slightly different shape to cut out of the paper. The point here is that if you have multiple teams working on your prototype, right, you'll have multiple solutions to choose from at the end of this particular example, right? So sometimes in the military simulation industry, tight deadlines lead to lower quality product. If this happens when you have months and years to develop something, you can imagine it's worse than only having 48 hours. So how is this mitigated? So this is avoided by as much as possible by utilizing the same quality principles and long-term projects like planning, code reuse, and clear comments. Also in these instances, there's also just a way to get not enough time. The mitigation is to have a cleanup phase between the end of the jam and then the prototype is published to take it further, right? But keep in mind that the initial quality is not a requirement to evaluate whether the idea is good. If it gets the main point across, it can be used by the customer to determine if they want to take it any further than before. I lost my mouse there. So ways to apply this game jam process to you guys. So first of all, you need to determine the overall goal and what you're trying to aim for, right? Because that's key in this process. Some game jams with younger developers are focused on learning, while others focus tied into more industry partners that are focusing on solving problems. That's like a lot of what the Armed Forces Jam is, right? It's bigger companies trying to solve bigger problems, and we're utilizing unique ways to do that. The goal seems to be appropriate for the military training to being a problem-solving goal. So we're going to go over 4 potential different ideas that can be potentially put into practice depending on your particular situation. So the first one is a single customer could present a single need, and the multiple teams could attempt to prototype it. This has the benefit of competition between teams and similar to a request for proposal with immediate results. The second version here is multiple customers could present multiple needs, and specific teams sign up with each of these customers to produce a prototype for them. The benefit of this approach is that multiple customers can use their needs met at the same time. So putting on a game jam takes time and resources. So the more customers involved, the more cross collaboration could occur in those particular situations. And finally, the last 2. So keeping up with a more traditional game jam concept, this is what we do for the Armed Forces Jam, is a game jam for partnering with a specific set of branches. We tried to partner with multitude of branches to create and solve multitude of problems. I think, Carolyn, we did, was it like 14 this past year we had, right? Something like
13 challenge statements, yeah.
Yes, 13 challenge statements. So these 13 challenge statements came from a variety of branches and a variety of partners and being able to try to be accomplished. And finally, the fourth one, which is an extremely unique way, a great way to serve our military is providing the troops with a source of entertainment and service. A game jam could be put there to where the troops themselves pitch ideas for games that they want to help solve their problems and they would see and need out on the field and they could have. I think that'd be a solid point. So you ask, so what's next, right? That is a great question. We're here. If you have a need, what would take for us to game jam? If these are questions that you have, right? I strongly recommend to take a moment to reach out to us. We appreciate the time, the effort. Collectively with Mike, we've got 45 years of game development knowledge and experience. We've been doing this a long time, and I appreciate the opportunity, and as I know for everyone else.
Thank you, gentlemen. I just want to follow up with a few specific comments that I think will also address some of the questions that were submitted ahead of time and tie to the last slide there about what's next. If you are with a branch of the U.S. military, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Space Force, you are a customer of Tech Grove. And there are direct ways for you to connect with us to participate in the 2023 Armed Forces Jam through the acquisition command of your service that is here in Orlando and that funds us directly. So I do want to make that very clear. And if I should also say that we actually are going to be doing 2 DoD focused game jams this year. There, the Armed Forces Jam, which will be our 3rd annual one, and the NATO Modeling and Simulation Working Group reached out to us as a result of seeing what was going on with the Armed Forces Jam and has asked to do a jam with us this summer. So we are putting that on the calendar, and we are just securing the problem statement for that. So that will be an international military coalition jam that we hope that you'll get in our community, give us your contact information so you'll know all about that to engage or participate. Some of the questions that were asked were around submitting problem statements, gathering problem statements. Where do those problem statements come from? As you heard Chad mention, this most recent game jam, we secured those challenge statements directly from the 5 services that are Tech Grove customers. The first year we did it in 2021, we did not do that. We did it a more traditional game jam way, which was we had a few problem statements from our customers. However, the teams were allowed to come up with their own idea about something that they thought might be relevant to DoD. Some wonderful things came out of that. However, what we discovered for our purposes as Tech Grove, which is to help our 5 services address needs that they have, we determined that it would work better and enable more follow-up if we restricted the problem statements or the challenge statements for the teams to tackle to those that came directly from the 5 services that fund us. So we ended up with the 13, and they were from all the services: Air Force, Navy, don't think Marine Corps had one, but Space Force had 4 or 5. As Space Force, which is one of our newer customers, and I don't know if anyone from Space Force, being having Guardians on the webinar here, there are some really interesting challenges that they have from a service perspective. And they were so engaged that they actually had a number of Guardians from Patrick Space Force Base here on a team, helping, actually creating games and participating on several of the teams. We also had the DoD Electromagnetic Spectrum Policy Office submitted a problem statement. So for the jam itself, we are open to and want to take statements from all of the Department of Defense customers. And I'm just trying to think through just some examples of what some of those challenge statements were to give our audience the benefit of that. One of them was Tech Grove. We actually submitted one, which was, okay, we have this digital twin of the physical Tech Grove space. We'd love for a team or 2 to take this, we'll provide the files, the digital twin access to the files for you to work with, and embed a lot more capability in it. The A2 team picked that up and are continuing to work on that, actually, because what we want to be able to do is utilize a digital twin version of the Tech Grove to enable someone to tour Tech Grove, to come visit us, to be here and attend events virtually without having to physically be here, as a way of showing, embodying what we're all about, what our customers are all about, which is creating these live virtual constructive synthetic training environments that are very real and enable our men and women in the service to train in a synthetic environment for force readiness and human performance. We had, help me gentlemen, I know we had one on recruiting. All of our TechGrow customers, all of the services have challenges with recruiting. There was the logical thought that gamification would be a great way to provide those that the recruiting officers are speaking with more insight into this vast realm of possibilities of career paths and opportunities to apply skills, apply degrees, and engage in areas that someone's really interested in as a career or as a preparation after serving for a while to move on into industry. So we had 3 teams that tackled the recruiting challenge.
Yeah, the one that I remember specifically was the Brazilian team. So
the Brazilian team did. There was a corporate team that developed a gamified recruiting tool for National Guard, and actually they are piloting that with the National Guard now. Space Force submitted one about base security.
Oh yeah,
gamified protection of the actual physical space.
I think the big takeaway to talking about challenge statements is that, understanding what I mentioned very briefly is like understanding the time of the event is going to be key, right? Because, Carolyn and you and I have, facilitated this event now 2 years and running now. So like how we structured challenge statements the first year was very different of how we structured challenge statements the second year, right? So, from the guys participating the first year and helping run the second year, it was like we had this very big, boisterous goal of like, how do we, narrow it down to find it, to being able to be accomplished in 48 hours. So when you and I were thinking of, okay, now we're challenging for year 2, how do we improve this process? We're like, cool, we need to make sure that these challenge statements can be obtainable within a certain degree within those 48 hours, because these need to be judged and viewed a point, right? There's a less of a degree of ambiguity into what's going off in like interpretation, right? Purely when the judges are looking at the pieces that are being built.
So when we were coming up with these problem statements, the 5 kind of core principles that I derived for how we should be creating good problem statements for something like a 48-hour jam, it first focuses on low scope. It's like, is this a thing that is achievable within 48 hours, or do I need like a team of 100 people and 6 years of development to make it? This is impossible. Low barrier of entry. So the developers on the team should not have to be experts in every facet of the subject matter to actually be able to create this. Or at the very least, if there needs to be a subject matter expert, one is supplied and they can assist with the development. Limited onboarding to the tech. So if you're looking at, I want to create something that's going to plug into the simulator, then they need to have all the resources they need, the SDK available, basically anything that can just lower that barrier of entry to make sure that they can actually work on the tech that they need to work on. If they spend the entire event working on trying to get the tech to work, they're not going to make the thing. It needs to be vertically sliced, number 4. So vertically sliced, when we talk about vertical slicing in like video game development, we're talking about if you took this entire game and cut a chunk right out of the middle, say this is a complete AAA polished finished thing, this little slice is our vertical slice is what we're showing. So what they're creating shouldn't be 10 years of development worth of work. It should be a small little demonstration of what the larger platform could look like. And then lastly, the problem statement itself should try as much as possible to avoid industry specific language. We have a lot of acronyms in DoD that we love to use and throw around, but at the very least, the problem statement should be written as simple as possible to make sure that anybody who looks at it isn't afraid to approach that problem statement.
That was the big difference between year 1 and year 2.
Yes. Yeah. And also, just a few other hopefully helpful insights here. The ask of our TechGrow customers to support Game Jam was not financial. Let's make that clear. We, those of us that you see on the call, we along with a few others, raised sponsorship dollars from industry to help support this and pay for food and T-shirts and stuff like that. Our ask of our government customers was the challenge statements, having subject matter experts here regularly throughout the 48 hours, and the judges were
Yep.
all representatives of the services that submitted the challenge statements. That was very important too.
That was one of the big major process changes from year one to year two.
Yes, and by having those subject matter experts here and the CTOs or chief scientists or chief engineers from the services, they get a firsthand view and exposure to the astonishing creativity that happens during one of these jams and what can be done in a short amount of time. There was a question submitted about what about taking existing programs and developing a different way to use the platform. We did have this case that your question's about something that's used by the military, converting it to civilian use. That would absolutely be possible. It's just a matter of structuring a challenge statement focused on that. One of the challenge statements we had in the 2022 Game Jam that was somewhat was Air Force has a modeling and simulation one-on-one course that they use for their employees that is still a PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah.
Shoot me in the head. Fortunately, they submitted that as a challenge statement to say, please gamify this. Let's make it a little more interesting and a little more engaging. And goodness, give the participant in the course a way to really experience what we're all about and modeling and simulation. So we had a team that started to tackle that, and hopefully they'll continue to. So that's a great example of a way to take an existing training tool and gamify it. Or a lot of what we get is taking an existing process and gamifying it. Maybe it's a maintenance and repair. Maybe it's a business process. Maybe it's a leadership program of some sort. There's not much you can think of that can't potentially be gamified as part of the process, not necessarily the whole process, but part of the process. Gentlemen, I think it would be helpful too to talk about how we bring the participants in, because as Tech Grove, we're not connected to this broad community of independent gamers, graphic artists, sound engineers, all these folks that are out there. They're college students, they're working for a company, or they're even some, in the military maybe, or somewhere else, and just want to participate. So
Sure.
That's really why we brought Indienomicon to the table. So if you could talk about how you reach out to that game community to engage them, and then just the flow of the weekend from the Friday night kickoff through to Sunday and what happens in those chunks of time. I think that would be helpful.
Sure. Yeah. So Indienomicon, for those who are unfamiliar with it, right, it is a foundation in Central Florida that's been around for, I think it's like 8 years now. It was originally started by a group of individuals and has now been transitioned to being a very focused community-based organization foundation to help growth and focusing now purely on these jams that we're mentioning, not only in this call, but the Mega Health Jam, Intergalactic Space Jam. It used to do a lot of different stuff for the community. We used to do local meetups and stuff like that. And so over these past 7-8 years, the community has been growing and growing, and we've had these tendrils that gone into other cities, right? So, even if we're outspoken to your particular jam of wanting to utilize different cities, right? Utilizing local internal groups of game developers and being connected to the community is going to be a strongly piece, right? Austin and Adrian being able to come from different educational establishments. I myself come from Full Sail, UCF, Valencia, being able to tap into our own internal networks. We've been doing this for a while, and so we have our own internal pieces. So when we reach out through LinkedIn and social and utilizing these, public pieces of being able to do that. Indienomicon it's a strong foundation to being able to do that, which is in our own backyard. So for the event itself, I usually am the individual maintaining the logistics of the weekend. So it is definitely a stressful time. What we've done in the past is usually there's a pre-event that happens prior to the event itself to allow the participants to rub shoulders with subject matter experts, being able to hear a couple special presentations that may or may not be within the same focus in some of the challenge area statements. We've done these events. We've been purely social events. We've done these as purely panel instructions. We've done a variety of different things over the past several years where we've done this. Example, we're coming into our third year for the Armed Forces Jam, but we've actually done the Intergalactic Space Jam I think we're on year 8, and so the goal is to bring that back into surface so we can partner with the space industry and get that back. That's been our flagship event for many years, and so looking forward to that. But the core event is 48 hours, and so Friday evening is mainly focused on everyone coming together at a particular location for Armed Forces Jam. We utilize the Central Florida Tech Grove. And so Friday night is pitching. There's going to be food, usually a part of that. It's a very social pitching event. And then the teams are forward after those things are pitched. So we time box every pitch. And so what we make sure we open up to be able to pitch ideas that follow into the subject matter experts, that things that were for the challenge statements that were provided. And then we allow them to go around the space, and then all the participants can go choose the team that they want to go work on. And then organizers like myself, Austin, Adrian, we would then, and the rest of the team, we would then go around to those other teams to making sure that they have the necessary requirements to be able to accomplish that project in 48 hours, because we want to make sure that whatever projects get through greenlit that first day, that they have the greatest degree of success at the end of that 48 hours, because we want to see success versus failure. Now, in the game jam is in a space that's okay to fail, and that happens. We just had that at this last year, and that's okay. But what you learn from it is going to be greater than the hurdle and the hiccup that you may or may not accomplish itself. Of all of the days, Saturday is the easiest. It is very straightforward. It is. There's a couple check-ins for the day. It starts early, usually around 8 o'clock, and it goes to about 11 p.m. But it's mainly basically on working day. We focus, and it goes back to that timeline that I talked about earlier in the presentation. You definitely want to make sure that you have a really good, solid foundation, if not prototype, of what you're trying to accomplish by middle of the day, if not closer towards the end of that day, because Saturday is going to be not very fun. Depending on how you're progressing, as both Adrian and us can attest out to that it can be rather stressful. I haven't had the opportunity in many years to be in their shoes, so I know seeing what that frustration can allow itself when it comes to logistics. And well, it comes for Sunday, it does start similar to the same time, 8 o'clock in the morning. So there's a set deadline for turn-in. That way, not only people can check out the projects, the judges can be able to assess those particular companies and projects itself, so criteria can be acclimated and be pieced together at the end. And then the evening ends with a presentation like series events. Carol Ann and I kind of changed up the kind of structure on presentations this year, and it went rather well. And so the way that we do presenting is very much like a Britain's Got Talent, where there's a panel of judges being able to ask questions live on stage with each particular presentation. And there's a series of judging criteria that I had put together that falls into a series of categories. And then my sub-team would then calculate those numbers. And then by the time we got to the very end, we would have a top tier list. We would take a small break. I would then update the presentation to being able to acclimate all the winners. And then we'd bring everyone back down, sit down, and we'd have a little bit of a 15-minute powwow, and we'll be in and out the door after a close down. So, that's kind of it in kind of a small window, Caroline.
I was just also thinking about some of the other key elements of the Game Jam, in addition to great challenge statements, subject matter experts, great organization and planning and logistics, having the right environment that can make it really easy for the participants to engage. And so that includes having tools. I mentioned that we had access that we could provide to participants to the digital twin files for Tech Grove if they needed a digital twin of a building of some sort to integrate into the game prototype they were creating. But for some of the challenge statements, it was clear from them participants, as Adrian mentioned or Austin mentioned earlier, making sure they had access to maybe data sets or SDKs or other tools that would be helpful to them and enable them to really focus on solving the challenge statement. But we're very fortunate. Another thing Indienomicon brings to the table is they bring great toys in.
Yeah.
Tesla sent some Tesla suits. We had Magic Leap headsets. What else did we have?
Yeah. So one of the things that we've been trying to dive into deeper with a lot of us being based out of the game space, but utilizing our tech partners to kind of harvest and bring unique pieces, right? So it's not only the Armed Forces Jam, we're utilizing the equipment that's based in your facility as opportunity to provide things, but as well as our partners itself. I'll give a shout out to John Cunningham at Unity. He was an extreme support on making this event possible. He was able to utilize his network to bring in exclusive key partners that not only financially supported this event, but it also allowed key technology to be a part of it. We had HoloLenses there. We had our priorities you mentioned. We had Tesla suits there. We had Magic Leaps there. We're going to be expanding that every time. We were able to construct a very good partnership by a local tech dealer, and that's going to be expanding into other stuff this year. Something that Austin mentioned earlier is we want to make sure people that represent these things have a stake in the game, and we want to make sure that if there is questions, right, there's a person that could be able to address that. And that was one of the things that, as we grow and adapt this event, that was definitely a pain point. It's not unaccomplishable, right? But it definitely makes things more challenging when we utilize these pieces of the tech equipment. So if we rock a Tesla suit and you want to do the haptic feedback in that suit, cool things can be done, right? But if you have all of these hurdles that you have no idea how to accomplish it just makes you trying to accomplish that, right? So it doesn't always just fall into, we're going to utilize, an Oculus, a Quest headset, right, versus anything. Even though that tool is readily available, we want to make sure that the other tech that we bring in is just as viable as everything else.
One of the questions that was submitted ahead of time was about whether or not the Game Jam is any particular platform centric, and the answer is absolutely not.
Nope.
Unity has been heavily involved.
Yep.
We are partnering here at Tech Grove with Epic, who does Unreal this year as well, and they've already committed to having subject matter experts on hand. So the participants are free to use whatever they would like and whatever they think is going to best help them accomplish the prototype that they want to develop at the end.
And I think this falls back into the 4 T's of Game Jam, right? If you dictate the jam to focus on a tool, right, you can do that, right? There are jams like you can go, and in our original presentation, Caroline, I had this giant picture of all of the game jams that you could see at any given moment. It was just like this rainbow spewed on the screen, but it was just all the times and all the stuff, right? Yeah. And so you just have to build specifically to what you're trying to accomplish. Is it tools? Is it time? Is it the amount of people? Is it the type of people, right? Is it just purely an art focused where you're just cool, this is the type of jam that we're going to be doing, right? So.
Yeah, and that's not to say that tools can't be a factor. For the Armed Forces Jam, of course, we want it to be open so that anybody can use whatever resources they want to achieve the goal, right? But there could be a different jam, and this jam is specifically focused on AR technology, or we're focusing on Magic Leaps or HoloLenses. Right. Houdini has their own jam that they do, and their caveat is you have to use Houdini to create their visual effects. But once you export them, you can export them to Unity or Unreal, doesn't matter. but as long as you use Houdini. So that is a benefit of using things like game jams is, hey, we have a new technology, we have an SDK. Does it work? Is it good? Does it satisfy the needs of what we are trying to accomplish? And you throw it at a bunch of developers who are gonna run it through the ringer and try to break it, because let's be honest, it's fun. It's a great way to kind of get the most of your technology. So that's why we also like having hardware partners that send us headsets and hardware and stuff, so they can actually get some use out of the technology that they're developing.
Which leads to another thought, and that is for those of you on the webinar that are with companies, and you're wondering, well, how might I engage? Well, one way is to offer some of your team members the opportunity to come participate. Send a corporate team to the game jam to actually engage. If you have tools that might be beneficial for the teams to use, we'd love to hear about that. But also, as I mentioned earlier, this event, we do depend quite heavily on corporate sponsorship, both for visibility of those companies to this extraordinary community of talent. It's all about workforce supply, right? But also at certain levels of sponsorship, as a company, it can submit a challenge statement. Momentum was mentioned. They have been a top level sponsor for a couple of years and submitted an actual challenge statement because they have things they're working on. And as a company, they can benefit from the rapid innovation that these teams of gamers can bring to the table for the weekend. Another question that was asked was about, well, then what, right? How do you make sure these things don't just, okay, that was a fun weekend, and everybody goes away, nothing happens. You may recall, mentioned earlier in the presentation, that one of the prizes, part of the prize package for the top 3 teams, is that we take them to the ITSEC show floor as part of the Tech Grove exhibit each year, because we want to give those teams that opportunity to be seen and to network with the 18, 19, 20,000 attendees at this international simulation and training event that takes place here in Orlando every year. And that is a highly impactful opportunity. We also invite those teams to participate in other events. We have an event here in Florida called Synapse that occurs in Tampa and Orlando each year, and we have invited the teams to be part of the Tech Grove booth at those exhibits. Sometimes we'll invite the teams to participate on a panel or engage in other events that we're doing at Tech Grove to continue to give them visibility as well. It's our job as Tech Grove to continue to give them visibility. It is our customers' job to pick that up and do something with it. Or as a company, often it's a larger company that's got to find one of these teams and the solutions that they have and partner with them to continue to move it forward. And we've seen that happen too. That's what we're doing so far. If anybody has any other ideas about how we can continue to give visibility to some of these things, we'd love to hear that. All right, gentlemen.
One of my last final things I want to spit in, Carolyn, if you guys, if anybody listening, if anybody wants to throw in the chat, if you head to the Indienomicon website, the Armed Forces Jam specifically has a lot of all of the challenge statements that break down the event, the subject, the judges that were there this past year. We did a major overhaul on just some visualness updates on the event itself, and expanding into this year, that will then continue to utilize that same process. So looking forward to communicating more about what the future holds this year for later in the year.
So, sure, if we have the ability in the last few minutes here to share to show the highlight reel from the jam.
So one thing I also want to kind of address while you have this slide pulled up, the URL in the top right corner, tinyurl.com/game jam white paper. That is the white paper that this presentation was based off, the original white paper that was submitted for ITSEC. So if you'd like to download it and review it, it's there for you. By all means, just take that URL right there.
Yeah, and if you go to YouTube and type in Armed Forces Jam, you'll see the 2002 highlight reel that will.
I went ahead and put the link in the chat.
Yeah, excellent. Because that gives you a great sense of what the environment's like, and you will hear comments from Tyson Griffin, who's the Chief Technology Officer for the Navy, and you'll just get a sense for what the vibe's like there.
And give a special shout out to Dave Vance for Soyo
Yes.
and the Orlando Life. So for those who are local, that's who our video photographer sponsor partner has been for the last couple of years. So you'll see his content for Synapse and stuff like that around. So I strongly recommend to, if you need some video stuff, Dave is a phenomenal resource.
Yes, absolutely. Any final thoughts or insights, Austin?
I'll go ahead and just go over some of these questions that I had.
Okay.
These preliminary questions, if I can find my page. A question did just come in that said, can game jams be used to troubleshoot or generate ideas to revamp existing systems? Of course.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. As long as the system is, again, tangible, something we can engage with, it's within scope to do within a game jam, then yeah.
And shareable with the participants of the jam.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have to have high level security clearance to access, so that doesn't really help your average developer. Other questions here. Interested in understanding how teams prepare for the rapid prototyping. Are analysis and design, storyboarding, scripting built into the process as well? As Chad kind of mentioned earlier, that there are a lot of different ways and how people attack, creating a project. Every company has their own different kind of scope and pipeline they work through. For us personally, with A Square, whenever we engage with a game jam, of course, yeah, we take storyboarding, scripting, all that kind of stuff into consideration. Basically, what we do is the same process we always do for every project, regardless of the timeline, but we just shorten it. So whereas we may spend 2 weeks in some kind of pre-production workshop planning with the customer, instead we do it in 10 minutes, just screaming at each other with a whiteboard, just going, no, that's a bad idea. All right, go over here. All right, maybe that'll work. And then halfway through it, maybe you scrap half your ideas anyway. But and I will also keep an eye out for any incoming new questions. And I will try not to steal all these questions for you guys in case you want to answer them as well. How have augmented and virtual reality advances in industry shaped the trajectory of this approach? Are there specific niches or for these different technologies within this application? That's a great question. There's a lot of, as we mentioned earlier, there's a lot of different technologies that we use during these events. Me personally, anytime I go to a game jam, regardless of the jam, I always try to make something in VR. That was just always my thing to like to do, because it was a way to challenge myself. I remember back in 2017 or so, VR was still kind of a new concept for a lot of developers, and engaging with it was kind of a pain. So whenever I would pitch something, people would avoid being on my team because they specifically thought it was too hard. And then after I kind of showed them hey, it's actually very simple. Here's kind of how you do it. And they're like, oh, okay, yeah. So we just make a game and we just make a thing, and the VR stack on top of that is just its own thing. But over the years, as the XR interaction toolkit and more agnostic, open XR solutions have kind of come out, you have a lot of technology frameworks that are making things very plug and play and simple. Some of them already included in Unity with just a few downloads from the package manager. I think that has made rapidly developing these kinds of programs with this kind of technology a lot simpler and faster. Whereas before I would use, a very specific version of the Unity editor with an old version of an SDK that I just know this one works, but if I switch it, it doesn't. I would just use that for everything I would develop. But now it's a lot simpler to jump in, use the newest technology, and things are pretty simple and streamlined. Anybody else want to contribute to that?
Yeah, we've got about a minute left. So
any last minute questions?
Yeah. I don't think we mentioned that we did have participants in the jam not physically here, right?
Yeah,
true. Yeah.
So just describe that briefly. So if you can't be here and you want to participate, or you would like to collaborate with Tech Grove and Indienomicon on the next Armed Forces Jam, and help us reach into your community locally of gamers. They don't have to physically come to Orlando, do they, team?
Correct. I mean, that's one of the things with the, we only have a minute or so, but with the pandemic, we tried to improve that process. So every time we've done a jam, we're trying to make that process a lot better and a lot stronger for remote-based teams itself, because we want to be able to be acclimated to all the different types that can be within the situation that we are in.
Yeah, so that Discord was a platform that we used, correct?
Yeah.
So a new question here: who would be the POC with TechGrove to set up a game jam specific to a requirement?
That would be me, Carol Ann. So I will put my email in the chat.
All right.
Or actually, you can just, we'll make it real simple, and you can just send to techgrove@ucf.edu.
There we go.
There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Roth. We look forward to having that conversation. And anyone else that would like to have follow-up conversation with TechGrove, with the Indienomicon team, we welcome that. And thank you so much for joining us today. Stay tuned for the email announcement of the March NTSA TechGrove Connect soon, and we'll hope to see you back. Thank you so much, Austin, Adrian, Chad, and
Thanks
Renee
for having us.
For all
Always.
Also, I should mention we're at the game space, Adrian and myself. So if you've ever been interested in learning more about the game space, if you want to stop by and visit and chat about anything specific, we're there usually Monday through Friday, So swing on by and chat with us.
Orlando Game Space, downtown Orlando. And you want to come to Orlando if you're not already here, right? We know that.
That's right.
It's only 80 degrees here. And with that, thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next month.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.